in Olympia, Washington, a new ordinance deemed the No Camping Ordinance went into effect on February 8, 2013. The new legislation bans camping on all public property and has left many wondering what's next for those seeking refuge from the elements.
Somehow in October of last year we became pretty popular. This became the place to be for homeless people, and we started getting more and more people, and that's when some of the problems started occurring. We'd have people who would smoke outside the doors and it would waft in, some people who would block the doorway so the public couldn't use the building. Then we'd started finding garbage and feces and urine and even needles, used needles. And so despite our efforts to kind of have conversations, some campers, and it's important to emphasize some, still didn't respect the space. Probably the straw that broke the camel's back was we had one of our employees coming to work at 7 in the morning and the campers were still sleeping downstairs. A dog saw her, went after her, lunged at her, and grabbed her coat and tried to pull her down. And didn't actually bite through the skin, but tore her coat. And that was a pretty big incident. So now we've got employees being attacked. That was a pretty big issue. And then added to that, about the same week, we had a couple reported but unconfirmed cases of MRSA, and MRSA is a very contagious disease, very serious. And so now we've got public health issues in addition to safety issues with employees and the public.
Public has reacted to the ordinance?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. I think if you talk to a lot of people that are sort of naysayers, and I think a lot of folks that don't come downtown who are very vocal about downtown, they're going to say, finally the city council's doing something. But what we saw was council chambers packed with 100 people who were all very much against it, and were there saying, we want better solutions and we're willing to be a part of those solutions. Just work with us.
It means that they don't really have a place to go now. And it means that they have to go into places that are not very seen, and it makes the problem invisible but not go away. It's also potentially more dangerous for people who are on the streets who go places where they're unseen, because violence can be unobserved and unstopped.
Can you tell us about any of those stories?
Yeah, there was a young youth named Sonic who was murdered a few months ago, in November, I think. He was here and was beaten and burned to death in the forest, and nobody knew until a few days later. And so those are the kind of things that can happen if it's not in the public eye, and that's really heartbreaking.
Breaking news now. Thurston County authorities say they've discovered a body inside a burned-out car.
This is happening in the Capitol State Forest. Police got that call about 9:30 this morning. King 5's Alyssa Hahn is at the scene, joins us now.
We began looking for the suspect in that murder, and we found him on the steps of City Hall during the camping. The person that we arrested, who we think is the murderer, was on the steps of City Hall. He wasn't sleeping at the time, he was talking to some people there. So people who perceived they were safe were standing next to at least a suspected murderer. So that's not a good environment for the campers, and it's certainly not a safe environment.
He brought up the relation of one of the people camping there to someone who had committed a murder. But again, there's crimes everywhere. I don't think that's a great excuse to ban somebody from living someplace. If I murder somebody, they're not going to go after my girlfriend in her house, so.
In response, the Olympia Movement for Justice and Peace and local community members set up a temporary camp at the Artesian Well downtown. This was the same day many homeless shelters for men were closed due to a slight rise in temperature. There was food, a 24-hour bathroom, an enclosed tent, and clean mattresses. 6 people slept there Friday night, March 1st. 14 people slept there March 2nd, and 22 people slept there on Sunday, March 3rd. Despite their efforts to compromise with Steve Hall to allow for a temporary shelter, their offer was rejected. The encampment was then moved to an unused parking lot of the Washington State Fish and Wildlife Building. 16 people stayed there that night. On March 5th, they were ordered by the police to vacate the premises by 6 p.m. 6 people were arrested that night for trespassing.
I went up and I did go onto the property, and then Wiley, who was the state police, first he said something, oh, you can't be on here. I ignored it, and then he said, something like, if you touch me, using the video, I'll take you down, I'll put you on the ground, I'll arrest you for assault. And I just tried to move away from him. I've had a fair amount of problems in my life with police in the past just because of my activism. So even these charges, it's not like I've never had any dealings with this before, and I have. And I'm a very non-violent person, but I've had a lot of repression, put it that way, in my life. And so I was really careful, and then he just grabbed me.
First, I think that the traditional shelter system is a really bad, it's a stopgap, it's sort of a Band-Aid on a cancer, It gets people out of the elements who can fit a certain mold. You've got like our Salvation Army in our downtown that I think for their women's beds they have something on average of like a 38%, they're 38% full every night. And for the men's, I think they're something like 65% full, but it's just really, really low numbers. They've got the most vacancies of any shelter in town by far. Most shelters are up at 90% full every night. And the reason for that is because they have certain criteria for people that can stay there. So if you have alcohol in your breath, or they just know you and know that you might be a problem, or you've got a mental health issue that's not being treated, so you're not on meds, so you might have an outbreak, or you have trouble sleeping at night because you have some chronic pain or whatever. There's all these different factors that can limit people from staying in shelters, and so the Salvation Army is very strict in who they let in. The people that they do let in, we hear, are successful in their programs and get into housing often, but they're missing so many people that could be sheltered. So that's obviously not working.